refugees and living in ghettos. You just can't make this stuff up. And these ghettos were policed by the Moors and then the Visigoths, aka the white Portuguese. These communities were not only segregated, but also had sundown laws, as in the Jim Crow South. One famous ghetto was a place called Macambo in Lipson. The word Macambo is a Portuguese word, meaning refuge for fleeing slaves. Now, why would a ghetto be called a refuge for fleeing slaves? See, the Inquisition or persecution of the Jews started in Spain and later came to Portugal. When these persecutions started, the Negro Jews of Spain began to flee to Portugal for a city of refuge. The number of those that were thus banished from Spain was 400,000 Jews, according to Ruthven and others. Mariana says, "'Tis not easy to reduce them to any certain number. Most writers affirm there were 170,000 families that departed. Others say there were 800,000 persons, a prodigious number, almost exceeding belief. Some of them, who were a little more dilatory in gathering together their effects and would not turn Christian, were sold for slaves. The Jews, thus driven from Spain, fled for the most part into Portugal." The History of the Inquisition by Philip Lombard. About 100,000 entered Portugal. They were permitted to enter under the condition that they must pay the poll tax, with the understanding that they will be asked to leave the country within 8 months. And when the time expired, many Jews were stranded because the king did not provide enough ships in time. All the black Jews who were left behind were deprived of their freedom and sold into slavery. From Babylon to Timbuktu by Dr. Rudolph R. Windsor. So Macambo became a refuge for a time for those who escaped the Spanish Inquisition until the persecutions in Portugal began. Hence the name Macambo, refuge for a fleeing slave. But soon afterwards, things began to deteriorate. See, when people think Inquisition, they think Catholics versus Protestants. They don't think Negroes and Jews. But the Inquisition quickly became a war against Negroes by the Catholic Church. Piercing shrieks of anguish filled the land. Childless and brokenhearted, they now sought to leave. But they were told they had forfeited their life and were given a choice between baptism or slavery. And after enduring all they did, after leaving their beloved Spain with all their wealth and ease, they were submitted to baptism now, in the hope of being reunited with their children. Thousands were sold as slaves. Yet prior to being sold, they were submitted to tortures, cruelties, to revolting, to repulsive, to heart-rending, to be here now. All Jewish children below 14 years of age were to be torn from their parents' arms or beaten with clubs, dragged into a church and baptized. Those under 3 years of age were given to Christians to be raised as slaves. Those between 3 and 10 years of age were put on board of a ship and conveyed to the newly discovered unwholesome island of St. Thomas, called the Ilhas Paredes, or the Isles of Destruction.
The Jews have experienced fully the unequal skill of the church in administering pain. Mothers cast themselves at the feet of the tyrants and pitifully begged to be taken with their babies. They were heartlessly thrust aside. Hundreds of mothers, mad with despair, ran behind the ships as they carried off the idols of their heart and perished in the waves, the same fortitude with which the exiled people had borne so many.
The Moors and Jews of Spain, like Joseph Krauskopf. Something was happening to these Negroes in Macambo. that really should sound all too familiar to a black American. They were called auto de fés, meaning acts of faith. Auto de fé, from the Portuguese, auto de fé, meaning act of faith. A ritual of public penance carried out between the 15th and 19th centuries of condemned heretics and apostates, or those who refused to convert to Christianity, imposed by the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition as punishment and enforced by civil authorities through beatings, hangings, and its most extreme form of death, by burning. Now, if we pay close attention to this timeline, we might see that the 15th to the 19th centuries is the exact same timeline of the expulsion, enslavement, beatings, hangings, and burnings of the Negroes, which was done in the territories of the Inquisitions by the executors of the Inquisition under the guise of acts of faith. Remember, the slave trade started with papal decrees of the Holy Roman Empire. When were they made, you might ask? Well, 1450 and 1493. 1493. But wait, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So just a year later, all this started? And within a decade, the auto de fés and later slaveries began. Let's not forget that 50 years later in 1550, the definition of Negro was changed from Black Portuguese to Native African. Lastly, when the slave colonies were established in Guinea, West Africa, by the Portuguese, which were filled with the enslaved children of the Negro Jews of Spain and Portugal, the territory, which was previously known as the Western Sudan or Soyudan, now became known after the arrival of the enslaved Portuguese as Negro Land, and the slave coast as the Kingdom of Judah. The Kingdom of Judah by the slave traders. I can speak on what they said about the inhabitants of Judah, but I'd rather let them speak for themselves.